You guys hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. All right. Okay. We are in the beginning of the third chapter of the Gita. It's actually an exciting place. It's actually an exciting place in the text. I'm excited. So, just to cover what we went over last week, because I know you guys have, I'll just briefly touch on it, because I know you guys have minds like a steel trap, and you never forget anything. What to speak of forgetting something in a week, which has never happened. And so, the Gita follows the method of the Upanishads. The Upanishads are a body of sacred literature written in Sanskrit thousands of years ago. The Upanishads are fairly abstract. They deal with the big questions of life. Who am I? Why am I here? What has value? What's the purpose of life? What is God? What is the self? What is the world? The big questions. And although the Upanishads deal with these really profound, largely abstract ideas that go beyond the normal stuff that we think about on a daily basis, they also follow a standard formula. A disciple asks the guru a question. That answer then leads to further questions, and there is a robust back and forth where the teacher and the student exchange ideas and where doubts are quelled and dealt with. Quickly. This way. It's over there. Yeah. So that's what we're going to get. And really Arjuna, although he began asking questions, follow-up questions in the second chapter, we're going to get, right now, we're going to get a real big question from Arjuna. Now the question seems fairly asinine and almost foolish, because Arjuna seems to have missed what Krishna's already taught. Now, what has Krishna already taught? Krishna taught two subjects in the second chapter of the Gita. He taught buddhi, or sankhya. Namely, he taught, buddhi means intelligence, sankhya means enumeration. He explained the basic difference between the body and the soul. The basic difference between spirit and matter. That's called Sankhya. That there's spirit and there's matter. We do this with quantum physics, where we describe fundamental particles. And so, for Krishna, matter in toto is one thing, and spirit is another. And so Krishna teaches a hard dualism at the beginning of the Gita. It'll eventually turn into that everything comes from God and is ultimately spiritual. But in the beginning of the Gita, Krishna teaches a hard dualism, which is really important. It's important to distinguish between spirit and matter. You look at a rock, and you look at a person. They're two different things. Physically, they may be made up of the same substance, but rocks are not conscious, and people are. And consciousness appears to display features that we simply don't find in the chemical world. If you have to break things down to one category, it should be consciousness. It should be your ultimate category. Therefore, we would be spiritual monists as opposed to physicalist monists that believe that everything is just matter. We believe that everything is ultimately spirit. Can you let Rukta know it's very difficult for me to think with him periodically making noise? And we're actually live with a full audience, and he continues to disturb things? Thank you. My son somehow has a very loud voice. I don't know where he got it from. It must be from his mother, because she's so annoying and loud. Couldn't possibly be from me, because I'm so mild-mannered and soft-spoken. So I've been largely waiting for him to shut up so I can start my class, and I feel like I've been spinning my tires because the sound is just irritating my mind. It's hard for me to focus on big topics, and it's even harder to focus on them while you're being heckled inadvertently. So let me just start again. The Gita follows the standard model of the Upanishads. That model is a question and answer model. It's an interesting mix. You're dealing with really profound, abstract subjects. At the same time, there's a robust back and forth, and there's a real logical progression where doubts are expressed and they're answered and logic is employed, but you're dealing with really heavy concepts that would normally be considered mystical and beyond the purview of logic. This would, of course, make sense to Greeks who thought that the logos was theos, and that the closer you got to logic and reason, the closer you were getting to the divine. So it's not that the idea itself is foreign, but nowadays, people, when they think of spiritual stuff, it has to be really mystical. In fact, if you speak in a nonsensical, almost schizo-affective way, like word salad, people think you're spiritual. If I was to say, go. They have to leave now. They actually have to leave. If I was to say, beauty, transcendence, becoming what is not, the truth, eternal. That is what really is reality. People would be like, wow, that's really deep, but I just said a bunch of words. I don't think the ideas were even logically connected. It was just mumbo jumbo. So when you're talking about mystical stuff nowadays, the more nonsensical you are, the more it's like you're Buddhist, you're Zen, it's like a koan. It's really deep. When you make sense and you sink your points and you provide evidence, people are like, that's not spiritual. It's too much like math. This is based on the notion that logic and spirituality are on opposite ends of the spectrum. But if everything comes from God, so did logic. And Leonardo da Vinci made the point. He said, I don't believe in a God that would endow us with a mind and intelligence and then expect us to give them up in order to understand them. I can conceive of a translogical deity, But an illogical, nonsensical deity doesn't make any sense. It's unreasonable. It leads to antinomianism. Anything goes. We shouldn't be so quick to jettison our God-given ability to reason and think. We should use it as our first step when looking at spirituality. Okay, so the Upanishads follow this question and answer methodology, and the Gita follows a similar question and answer protocol when dealing with big topics: self, God, world, who am I, why am I here, what's the purpose of life, what has value, what's worth pursuing. And what we get in the third chapter of the Gita is Arjuna really asking his first big follow-up question. And it seems like he just missed the entire second chapter. So the second chapter, Krishna taught two main things. He taught that you're not the body, which is called Sankhya, or Buddhi. And then he taught what you do once you know that, which is yoga. You apply that in your life. So you do your duty, but you don't get attached to the result. It would be called a duty-based ethic, or a deontological ethic, a deontology. An acts-based ethic, a duty-based ethic. Do the right thing. Don't worry about the results. Why do you not worry about the results? Because you realize you're not of this world. There's something bigger going on. And therefore, when you're moving in this world, you're able to move gracefully. Find your satisfaction doing your duty. Carry sunshine around your pocket. You never have a rainy day because you can control doing your duty. You can't control the results. This is good advice for an atheist. What to speak of for a spiritualist. Even an atheist has to acknowledge they can't control the results. An atheist should still learn a duty-based ethic, because how else could they be assured of happiness? If you get to choose what you place value on, why not place your value on doing your duty? Because then you can at least control your happiness. For a spiritualist who realizes there's something bigger going on, then it makes it much easier to let go of this world. Because they got something bigger on the fire. You're not the body. Go back to life, but don't be attached to the results. These are the two teachings of the second chapter, in a nutshell. Arjuna then begins the third chapter by saying, why do you want to engage me in karma? Actions, if you've told me that buddhi, enlightenment, is better than action? Why do you want to tell me to act? Why do you want to tell me to act if you just said that enlightenment is better than acting? Arjuna's question displays a grotesque ignorance of what Krishna just taught, because he taught you're not the body, and now go live. He put those two ideas together. He did a marvelous job. It's extremely clear. And then Arjuna unnecessarily dichotomizes the issue and says, you were glorifying that you're not the body, and now you're telling me to do my duty. Which one is it? Well, it's both. I clearly said you're supposed to walk and chew gum. But Arjuna's having a hard time with it. My intelligence is bewildered by your equivocal instructions. Krishna's an equivocator. You're in good company. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial. This, of course, is called an artificial dichotomy. The first thing you should do when somebody creates a dichotomy, it's got to be either or, is you should decide whether it could be and or. are those two things really mutually exclusive? Sometimes they are. But is there anything inherently mutually exclusive about knowing you're not the body and then doing your duty but not being attached to the results? I can't see anything mutually exclusive by those. Those two things seem to fit together like peanut butter and chocolate. They seem to fit together perfectly well. Match made in heaven. Here's the thing. Thus far, I've just recapped what we've already covered. Here's the thing. In ancient India, the guys who said you're not the body, they were called Sankhyas. Followers of Sankhya are called Sankhyas. They fought with the yogis. Followers of yoga are called yogis. Followers of Sankhya are called Sankhyas. Then followers of yoga are called yogis. Those two ideas belong to two distinct groups. If you read the Mahabharata, you find these two groups arguing with each other philosophically. There are no Sankhyas left, and there aren't no really yogis left either. The yogis of today who do Hatha Yoga or some abridged format of Hatha Yoga or what they call Ashtanga Yoga, which is just Hatha Yoga with a branded name. The yoga you find in the West was not the yoga of the yogis spoken about in the Mahabharata. The yogis, by the descriptions of the arguments, they were people who were very duty-based. They lived in this world. They did their duty. They were act-based philosophers who really wanted to, walk their talk. The Sankhyas, they seem to be more ethereal and more bookish and more like bookworms and less participatory in the world. And so these two groups, a long time ago, fought with each other. Now there's something in ancient Indian thought called a samanvaya. It's a perfect, harmonious resolution to the paradoxes of the world where seems like things are mutually exclusive, but it brings them together on a higher level. Like if I had a GPS that worked and it said you were in the room, but I'm sitting in the room and I'm looking at the GPS and you're not there, and I figure the GPS is broken, GPS must be broken or I must be blind, but actually neither is true. There's multiple floors in the room and the GPS doesn't tell you which floor somebody's on. It just tells you where they're located in 2 dimensions. It doesn't give you the 3rd dimension so you know which floor the person's on. You follow? And once I realize that, now all of a sudden the GPS works and my eyes work because I've realized on a higher level there's a reconciliation. Namely, the GPSs tell you in 2 dimensions. They don't tell you 3-dimensional. And therefore, you have to look on all the levels of the building. Does that make sense? So a paradox appears, 2 things that appear to be contradictory, but they can be resolved with a deeper, more profound understanding. There's a famous Indian folk tale. There was a blind man who was poor and had no children. He was given one wish. And so he said, I wish to see my children playing from my palace. So if he sees, he's not blind. If he has a palace, he's not poor. And if he has children, he's not childless. And so he figured out a way to gather up everything under one sentence. Krishna in the Gita is attempting a samanvaya. He's trying to take these two schools, which fought with each other for centuries and millennia, and bring them together and show the value in both of the schools and where they agree and how their differences are not actually substantial. And he's trying to take the best of both worlds and come up with a grand, unified field theory. Like in physics, the order of the last 100 years, but really the order of the last forever. If you could take quantum mechanics, which is how small objects behave with their weird, fuzzy behaviors like quantum leaps, and you could reconcile that with how large objects behave, following the rules of classical mechanics, you would have solved the largest question in the universe, as far as we've understood it. We found two realities that are mutually exclusive, and somehow they're both true. If you could unify those two concepts, you've done everything. These kind of grand universal theories. We want this. We want to figure it out. We want to understand. It's part of our nature to try to understand. We have these massive brains. We were designed to think and to understand. People are like, well, you think too much. It's like a couch potato saying you exercise too much. It's like some fat, obese, unhealthy, diabetic person who's going to die because of morbid obesity telling you that you exercise too much. No, you have a body. It was made to be exercised. You have a massive brain. It was made to be exercised. You have ID, intellectual disability, also known as MR, mental retardation. The word retarded is not popular. The word retarded is a medical term used for someone with below a 70 IQ. You have three forms of mental retardation, MR. You have mild MR, which is you have a 50 to 69 IQ. Below 70, but it's 50 to 69. Then you have moderate. Moderate, I believe, is 25 to 50.
I don't know.
And then you have profound, severe mental retardation, which is usually it's below 19. Thing is, you can't just study somebody's IQ, you also have to study their adaptive behaviors. How to diagnose mental retardation is much more difficult than just looking at people's IQ. We've learned you have to find that they have two poor adaptive behaviors. There's a list of adaptive behaviors. There are ways we socialize and learn to function in society and learn to control our emotions and things like executive function, the ability to learn things and follow rules. And it's very, the thing is this, if you get to a kid young and they're not in the profound case, you can really help somebody. You can really help somebody live a full life. Because even in idiopathic, which is actually the term, idiopathic MR, idiopathic mental retardation, which is when it's not syndromatic, when it's not from like a Down syndrome or something like that. Syndromic, I think is what it's called. They don't know why. Some people are just born mentally retarded and they don't know why. There's no Down syndrome or other genetic thing they can point to that caused it. Even when you're dealing with that, if you get to a kid young and you work with them, they can learn adaptive behaviors and they can go and live a full life. A friend of mine has a kid, he's on the, autism is actually a whole different thing than MR. It's a whole different thing. But she had a kid who was pretty autistic. She just decided, all right, I'm gonna make it happen. And she just spent the next 15 years of her life making her entire life about making sure that her son had every possible tool in the toolbox, every possible opportunity. Now he's going to high school. Had she not acted the way she did, and the music therapy and constant after-school activities and tutors and everything the state could provide, and her husband was in the military, everything the military could provide, it wouldn't have happened for him. It would have been much harder for him. We have these brains. They're made to be stretched. Even you get dealt a poor hand from the deck of life, your brain's still made to be stretched. Even you're born with some physical disability, your body is still made to be stretched and worked. We respond so well to stress. We need to learn how to think. We need to stretch ourselves to learn how to house apparently conflicting subjects. And people who don't want to do that, they're just mental couch potatoes. It's hard. I read something like philosophical, or definitely if I'm reading hard logic, I gotta read the same thing 5, 10 times. I gotta get out, I gotta go on Google and look up the logical symbols for the mathematical proofs they're giving for their arguments, and slowly and methodically go through them and make sure I haven't missed anything. And half the time I gotta read 10 other things to understand the thing I'm reading, and it's miserable. You just don't want to do it. You want to go play basketball or something like that, or lift weights or something, or go wrestle, because it's just so much less demanding. But there's incredible value in forcing yourself to reconcile apparently contradictory things, forcing yourself to think deeply about the world. So Arjuna just can't wrap his head around it. There are these two schools. And we're like, well, what's the problem? That's because you didn't grow up in ancient India where these were two actual competing schools that fought with each other tooth and nail. The history of which is recorded in our ancient texts. So on one hand, you've got these Sankhyas. They're like these philosophers. They're kind of bookwormish. And then you've got these yogis that are very different than the yogis of today. The yogis of today sound more like the Sankhyas of the past. Kind of meditative, right? But these yogis were about doing your duty and busting a move and making it happen. They would probably be more likely to be married, have families, be warriors, work in this world, do their duty. You follow? But then they were hopelessly attached and materialistic. And the Sankhyas were lazy and super thoughtful but lazy. These two schools fought. Krishna was putting together a grand unified field theory of his time to take these two ideas and marry them together. And you find this as the subtext of 3 or 4 different sections of the Gita. In fact, it's the subtext of the first chapter we just studied, the second chapter, the first teaching we just studied. It's the subtext of that. Krishna trying to marry these two disparate ideas together. He does so marvelously enough, where we're like, oh yeah, it's like a 1-2 punch. It's like a jab cross. Yeah, of course that's what you do. It's like a match made in heaven. It's perfect. Just like we know that slavery is wrong. A few hundred years ago, nobody knew that. Nobody knew that. Everybody was an idiot. You follow? Women got the right to vote 100 years ago to the year, practically. It was 1919, 100 years ago. That means prior to 100 years ago in this country, the value system of our country was that women were too stupid to participate in the electoral process. They could not be trusted. Do you follow? That's it's really heavy. That was just 100 years ago. There's people still alive today. There's people over 100 alive today who were alive at that time. They were small children, infants. But there are people in this country that were alive before women had the right to vote. You follow? We get this beautiful version in the second chapter, but we don't understand that Krishna's already begun his process of a samanvaya, and it was so deeply woven into Arjuna's psyche that he needed more. He needed more. Arjuna, which one was Arjuna? A yogi or a Sankhya? Huh? And what's the problem for the traditional yogis? They would get too attached. And so what was the core of his argument? Bad things are going to happen. You follow? He didn't have this idea of a duty-based ethic where it didn't matter what happened. It was a results-based ethic for him, because that's the pitfall. And so then the grass is green on the other side. Oh, let me just be a theologian and go off in the forest and not fight. Because that was the other option available to him at that time. That was the other option. There was no other option. So, now that we've understood the background of what Krishna was contending with, his answer to Arjuna's question will become more clear. Krishna says, this is the third verse of the third chapter. I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical philosophical speculation. The Jnana Yoga, by Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam, by the Jnana Yoga of the Sankhyas. Karma Yogena Yoginam, and by the Karma Yoga of the yogis. There are two types of people who are trying to realize the absolute. There's one group who's trying to understand it by Jnana Yoga, by the yoga of knowledge, by yoking themselves to knowledge. There's another group who tries to yoke themselves to action. Jnana Yogena, by the Jnana Yoga, Sankhyanam, of the Sankhyas, Karma Yogena, by the Karma Yoga, Yoginam, of the yogis. You see? It's incredibly clear that Krishna is well aware of these two schools that are discussed at length in the Mahabharata itself, which the Gita is a part of. But Krishna does something important here. He names the process followed by the Sankhyas, and that process is Jnana Yoga. And he names the process of the yogis, and that process is Karma Yoga. Now, if you go to a yoga studio in the United States, I don't know what it's like in Europe or in India. It's definitely not like this in India. But if you go to a yoga studio in the United States, they'll ask you, they'll be like, oh, you have to do some Karma Yoga. Karma Yoga is a euphemism for voluntary labor. Yoga studios, you pay them money to study yoga, and then part of what you have to do when you pay money to study yoga is you have to give volunteer hours at the studio. It's a brilliant model, and you know what I mean? It's a fantastic model. It's like if somebody was to pay you to teach them, and then you told them, and part of your teaching process is you have to work for me for free. It's brilliant, you know? Yeah, it's like an internship. Yeah, you pay. Normally, internships don't cost money. Normally, if you do an internship, your work is in lieu of money, and sometimes you get paid during your internship. But there's this brilliant phenomenon that happens in yoga studios where you pay, and then you also have to work for free. And everybody does this. Core Power does it. Everybody does it. And they give it a nifty Sanskrit name, so you don't really realize what's going on. They call it karma yoga, and then like you're dumping the trash and like cleaning the toilets, and like, but it's karma yoga, and it's like, oh, okay, it's karma yoga, as opposed to I'm doing janitorial work for free at a place I paid to attend. So it's a phenomenon. So that's how we use the term karma yoga in the U.S. That's how we use the term karma yoga in the U.S. I actually don't think it's wrong, yoga studios. It's good for people to do some work, but I think there's nothing wrong with that model. And I don't think it's abusive and like they're really making you like work like, some kind of indentured servants or anything like that. It's good for people to step out of their comfort zone and be a part of a community. I'm not actually knocking on it. I'm just having a bit of fun. That's not how the term karma yoga was used in. Not exactly how the term karma yoga was used. Karma yoga meant to do your duty and fight in the battle as you were obliged to. Jnana yoga meant to think of things like you're not the body. How do we know that? Because Krishna took the two terms he used, yoga and Sankhya, in the second chapter, and he then called what those two groups were doing, Jnana yoga and karma yoga. So what happens is this. When you look at the way language is used nowadays, it's not always representative of how that language was used a long time ago. Now, I can say the term used to mean this, but who am I to say what it used to mean? When the terms are defined in a classical text, and you can read it in Sanskrit, you actually understand what's meant by those terms, how those terms were traditionally used. Jnana yoga, at the time the Gita was composed, meant to theorize and think about the distinction between the body and the soul and perform thought experiments to realize the difference between spirit and matter. Karma yoga alternatively meant to do your duty and fight in a battle or do whatever your duty might be at a given time. You follow? Does that make sense? They were two different schools. However, in Krishna's version of yoga, he's going to eventually make the point that yoga includes Sankhya if it's properly done. He does not make that point now. The karma yoga that we're hearing about now is just doing your duty. Because if you define these two schools as being separate, you can't collapse that separateness by making them one. Let me say it again. I say to you, there aren't two schools, there's just one school. You're walking and chewing gum. You go to me, now which one is it? Do I walk or do I chew gum? I go, okay, fine. There's two schools. One says walk, the other school says chew gum. Right? But I'm going to mix them together and say walk and chew gum. You follow? Krishna is not doing that right here. He's acknowledging a difference in the two schools. You follow? He's going to go back and he's going to play with it. And you're going to watch him evolve his argument over several chapters to get back to what he said in the second chapter. But he's going to do so logically and reasonably. You're going to watch it happen. He did it in the second chapter. He just said the two become one. Arjuna couldn't get it. Then Krishna's going to indulge the separation and he's going to gradually work back to streamline them. Does that make sense? So the karma yoga here kind of refers to materialistic, attached action, but doing your duty, but getting attached to the results. You'll see it in a minute why I say this. You'll see it in a minute why I say this. Indulge me. Give me some time to work. Have you guys followed this so far? Krishna is a grand universal theorist. The audience he's giving this to is not ready to stretch their brain. It's just too much. It's too much. You see this sometimes. You overload somebody with information. They just can't do anymore. And you got two choices. You either say it right, and it's down for posterity's sake, and they can listen to it when they get older, or you just slow the whole thing down so they can follow you. Does that make sense? All right. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. What's Krishna doing there? Let me read it again. Think about it. Think about it. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. What's he doing? Loud.
He's saying neither school by themselves.
Wrong. I thought somebody might think he's saying neither school by themselves works, but he's not. Yes.
He's saying you have to act.
He is saying that, but that's not what he's doing. That's what he's saying. What's he doing? Yeah?
Making it clear that neither one works.
That's just what he said. You're just repeating almost verbatim what he said, and I cut him off mid-sentence, said he was wrong, and then repeated what he said. So why would I possibly, change my mind?
I thought I was saying what he's doing, and he was saying what he said, but maybe it's the same thing.
Krishna is ripping on the Sankhyas. Both statements are a critique of the Sankhyas. Listen to it again. Not by merely abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction. So that means if you don't do anything, you're still going to get karma. Nor by renunciation alone can one achieve perfection. Who's he ripping on that time? Huh? He's ripping on the sannyasi, the jnana yogi, right? He's ripping on the Sankhya twice. See what he's done? He's not saying both schools are wrong. He's saying these guys, the jnana yogis, the yoga of knowledge, also called the Sankhyas, also called the sannyasi. That word's used here as well. Those three schools are wrong. Not by sitting on your couch do you achieve freedom from karma. Just like you can commit criminal negligence by becoming a professional procrastinator, equivocator, doing nothing, committing to nothing. You still get karma. He'll argue why. Manu argues why with the Panchasuna, the 5 slaughterhouses. When you use your broom to clean your home and you kill insects. When you use your fire to cook and you kill insects. When you drink water and you kill insects. On your mortar and pestle, when you're grinding grains and grinding spices, you're killing insects. So there are the natural ways in which just by living in this world you become implicated in karma. Krishna's going to make a variation of that argument. Everyone is forced to act helplessly by the qualities he's acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. Even if you're just breathing, you're killing some microorganisms. You're doing something. You're implicated. By the way, the word prakriti is introduced here, and the word guna is introduced here. Actually, the word guna was introduced in the second chapter. Prakriti is introduced here as the source of the gunas. That's Sankhya philosophy. That Prakriti gives rise to the gunas, or Prakriti is the gunas, and those things control you. Now, this is a weird phenomenon, at least thus far in the Gita, because you have no control, yet you get karma. Like, that's not fair. If predestination exists, then it's God's fault and you get no karma. But thus far in the Gita, we're left with this question of like, wait a second, there's predestination, I'm out of control, I'm forced to act helplessly. But I'm getting karma. You follow? So that's something that has to be reconciled. But man, is Krishna going big against the Sankhya school, against the Jnana school, right? You hear it, right? Mm-hmm. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, that person certainly deludes himself, and they're called a pretender. Mityachari, false actor, faker. Ultimately, you can't fake it for life. You put a dog on a throne, in due course of time, the dog will show its doggish nature. Put a big crown on a dog, put a big cape on a dog, dress him up like the King of England. And if you throw a bone on the ground, it'll go and lick the bone, chew on the bone, because it's a dog after all. So you may be able to restrain your senses for a minute, but people's true colors ultimately show through in due course of time. People show what they're made of. Good and bad. It just takes a few ticks of the cosmic clock for things to become clear. I'll save how we become deluded for another day. But Krishna's making a real scathing critique of these jnanis. He's calling them pretenders. And a culture like this culture where honesty was so highly valued. You know, like there's that Saudi Arabian journalist who went to go get his paperwork done so he could marry his Turkish bride, and he was murdered and dismembered by the Saudi secret police and the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. His name was Khashoggi or something like that. You guys heard about this? A Saudi Arabian journal a couple of years ago was in Turkey with his fiancée, went to the Saudi embassy. He'd been critical of the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He went in the Saudi Arabian embassy, which is technically Saudi Arabia. An embassy is not it's the country of the country the embassy belongs to. If you attack an embassy, it's a declaration of war. The ground of the embassy is their own. The inside of their cars is their own. That means a diplomatic, a full ambassador, let's say from Turkey in the U.S., could commit murder, go to the embassy, the police could not get him, drive from a car, which is also Turkish soil, drive to the airport, get on a Turkish plane, that's also Turkish soil. The U.S. government could not do anything to stop him. We would depend on the Turkish government handing him over to us voluntarily. We would exert tremendous diplomatic pressure on them to do so, but they decided to play hardball. He has diplomatic immunity. We can do nothing to him. All we can do is call him a persona non grata, which means the person is never allowed in this country again, and we never have anything to do with him subsequently. We're allowed to deny him to have anything to do with our country in any way, shape, or form, but we can't persecute them without the permission of the parent country. There's no way to have diplomatic relations where the people they send over to your country are subjected to your laws. So the people they send over have diplomatic immunity. They can do, practically speaking, anything. And it depends on there being nice diplomatic relationships between the countries to stop these people from committing horrible crimes. A lot of times they'll go back home and they'll be killed or imprisoned back home, and that's how they show us that they take us seriously, and we have to preserve diplomatic relations. Anyway, the Saudi government got a hold of this critical journalist. He made this mistake of setting foot in the Saudi embassy, and they killed him. It was recorded. And then they dismembered him and smuggled him out somehow or other. There's no body. They dissolved it in acid or whatever. The Saudi secret police. Huge coup. They lied about it. Said, no, we didn't do anything with him. Or no, he died of an overdose, or he died of a heart attack, or we don't know what happened to him. Okay, yeah, we did this. And then the Turkish government, which had been bugging the Saudi embassy, they released to our government some of the footage, and then they couldn't deny it anymore, and they finally admitted it. And then they persecuted, I think, 11 people connected to the crime, and 4 of them were sentenced to death. But in Saudi Arabia, they're sentenced to death, but the door is left open. If the children of the victim forgive them, their sentence will be commuted and they won't be killed. And so the children said, we're going to leave it to Allah to handle these people. We don't want them to kill them. The children didn't want to tarnish their father's memory by having the actors who committed the crime, who say they were doing of their own, not on behalf of the prince. As if that would happen. And so they were forgiven. Saudi Arabia is an old world country. A person's word carries weight. According to Saudi law, if the person you murdered forgives you, or if their heirs forgive you, you follow? That's equivalent to the person forgiving you, and your sentence is commuted, and you're not killed. Heavy, right? Arjuna was from a culture where honesty and valor and integrity were the most prized possession. We don't have a culture like that here anymore. It used to be, you make a promise, you keep it. You take a marriage vow, you're married for the rest of your life. That's it. Doors closed, there's no more discussion on the topic. That's how people used to be. They didn't cheat, they didn't divorce. That's just what it was. You gave your word, you kept your word. Prabhupada was so bewildered when his disciples broke their vows. He said, even a gentleman keeps his promise. What are you doing? Even a carmy, meat-eating gentleman, like a British gentleman, if he gives you his word, that's it. It used to be a handshake, or your word, your honor, meant something. You'd rather die than give up your word. The martyrs in early Christendom, the martyrs before Christianity took over and became all the rage, the Romans would make you renounce your Christianity. And there were thousands of Christians who just refused to give up their Christianity. Hey, we're going to feed you to the lions. That was a real thing. They actually fed you to lions. Or we're going to crucify you upside down. That was a real thing. They crucified people upside down, even worse than Jesus. Or throw you in a vat of boiling oil, or burn you at the stake. There's a ton of stuff they did to people. And early Christians would just refuse to say, I renounce Jesus. Peter renounced Jesus 3 times in a day, but all the Christians learned their lessons from that one, because he went down for all time as having blown it. And so Christians would just refuse. No, I won't renounce Jesus. We're going to burn you at the stake. Okay. We're going to throw you in oil. Okay. People had culture. They had integrity. They gave their word. It meant something. And so Krishna's critique that these people are hypocrites, they're pretenders, you have to understand how heavy that critique is. The accusation of hypocrisy was very substantial. Like in prison, even to this day in prison, if you say something to somebody, if you call somebody a punk in prison, it's a fight. There are certain things you can say to somebody Whereas like if you just say that, that's it. It's enough. Like that's all it takes. Like you say it, it's clear. You're saying you want to fight. There's no other way around it. Once those words are uttered, a fight has to happen. There's no other option. And so in a martial culture, in an old world culture, this was the standard. And so Krishna's accusation, these Sankhyas, do you think you can achieve perfection by not doing your job or by renouncing the world? You can't renounce even for one moment. You're forced to act. And you might restrain your senses, but your mind is still moving, and that's still committing karma. You still get karma for your thoughts. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the senses by the mind and begins karma yoga without attachment, he is by far superior. So, is he saying either one by itself is insufficient? He is not. He's saying the yogi is better than the Sankhya. You follow? Now you could say, well, that yogi is detached. No, he's not. Perform your prescribed duty, for by doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. What he really says is work done for yajna has to be done. For yajna. Otherwise, work will cause bondage in this world. Therefore, perform your prescribed duty for that purpose, for his satisfaction, for that purpose. And in that way, you will always be free from bondage. So, here, it sounds like Krishna is saying that the karma yogi is working in an unattached way. Therefore, I'm wrong when I say that the karma yoga here is attached work. That's what it sounds like. But I'm doubling down and I'm saying no. The karma yoga Krishna's talking about here is attached. You're attached to the result. He has stepped backwards from his teaching in the second chapter because Arjuna is incapable of fathoming what was said fully. And so he's going to teach in a more gradual way. I'm doubling down, and I'm even being directly contradicted by the verse. You follow? We'll come back to this verse before the end of class. But we're going to read a couple more verses. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and that Lord blessed them, saying, be thou happy by this yajna, sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. It says it will be your ishtakama duk. It will be your wish-fulfilling cow. It'll give you everything you want. What will give you everything you want? Sacrifice, yajna. Does that sound like it's telling you to be detached? It doesn't. It says, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Maybe I misread it. The demigods being pleased by sacrifices will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. Does that sound selfless? It's the opposite of selfless. It's transactional. Is that sacrifice? Did we go over an hour?